designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm on my way to meet up with Charlotte Vowden. We're going to have some brunch together, and then she's going to join me in Peggy for us to record a podcast together. We're hoping to talk about her experience joining the classic car scene with Frisky, and also how she's got to kind of grips with enjoying and adventuring out in her classic car as well. So hopefully he really enjoys today's podcast, and you'll join me next with Charlotte in the car. Okay, so we're now joined in Peggy by Charlotte. How are you finding the back seat of a Morris Minor, Charlotte?
The back seat of a Morris Minor is very comfortable. I would estimate that I've only ever been a passenger and behind the wheel of a classic car less than 10 times in my entire life. So getting in a classic car generally is a pretty exciting experience, but this one is even more special because of the way that you use Peggy. So I was actually also quite surprised about the kind of low growl that she's got.
Yeah,
because I thought she'd be a lot noisier. Yeah. So she's super cool.
It carries, because my parents are always saying how they can hear me coming.
Yeah.
But absolutely, yeah, it carries. She's got a little bit of a noise to her, but it's not too bad, really.
No, not too noisy. And that always surprises me, is the different sounds that the engines of these old cars make.
Yeah.
You know, with new cars, you can hardly hear them unless there's something going wrong. So on my daily driver, which is an Astra, I switched on the engine this morning and I can hear something sort of a kind of like a whizzing sound coming from the engine bay, and it's like, it doesn't normally make that noise, there's something wrong. Whereas old cars, every single engine has its own quirky little song and dance and thing that it goes on. So
and even then you get to know like when something is doing what it's supposed to be doing, and when something's a little bit, oh, that's unusual, I don't remember it making that noise.
Absolutely.
Peggy's developed a little bit of a weird noise that I believe is the new horn that I fitted.
Oh really?
Just like knocking against part of the body.
Okay.
But it's not, because I thought it was something else and it's not that, so I'm just like, oh, okay, well that's just a new noise that's going to be normal until I can adjust where that's sitting. So it's not too noticeable, I don't think.
Why did you get a new horn?
Because it sounded fun.
Can we have a demo of it?
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. That's so good.
So
if you can't see this, but we've just gone over this super cute little stone bridge, and we were right at the peak of it as you did that. So that was very much announcing our arrival on the other side.
Absolutely, yeah.
Very cool.
And the horn, the original horn is still fitted, so that one's just wired up to join in with it. So they both make it together. Basically, my parents got this A40 that has this fantastic horn in it, and as a thank you for my dad coming to the NEC, he bought me the horn to kind of go in Peggy, and we fitted it together. And so this will be the first season where it's been the new horn sound in between the cuts. So
it's so interesting how it adds that like dimension to a car as well.
Yeah.
Because my dad and I, we changed Frisky's horn, my MGA Roadster that I drive. Her original horn sounded very much like yours.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna say it sounded horny. You know, like that kind of stereotypical, like really cool, distinctive noise. But we replaced it because we needed a bit more ground clearance underneath.
Yeah.
So we've got two new sort of little funnels that come out, and it sounds modern, and it just doesn't suit the car whatsoever. And we changed it for practical reasons, and because we do sort of like fairly sort of challenging drives and across different terrains occasionally, it makes sense to keep it with this new format. But it just doesn't sound right. It is really awkward, you know. And you know, my dad's just like, and I'm like, oh no, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Check out that dude. It's just cruising on his little mobility scooter.
Yeah, brilliant. The horn's definitely like baby car. I remember like my dad's cars with the horns and stuff. Like it's a little bit their voice, isn't it?
Yes.
So like that's why I wanted to keep her original horn in there, but attach the kind of new one up as well, so that they're both going in tandem. But it draws a little bit more on the electrics. So it's a case of I couldn't sit there at the NEC and just hold it for the whole time anymore. I have to keep pushing it a little bit.
Is that for the end of the show?
End of the show,
celebratory.
Yeah, absolutely. Speed bumps, here we go.
Yeah. I was driving with my dad the other day, and we have a brilliant relationship, very different personalities, very different skill sets, and you know, I've been driving for quite a while now. I know how to approach a speed hump, but he cannot resist telling me what to do when we're approaching a speed hump. And it was quite early in the morning, and we'd got the MGA out because we're doing a bit of a trip, and you know, so there's no other cars around, so you can go to the middle of the road and cross them that way rather than going over the singular hump. And he's just telling me what to do, and it's just like, shut up, Dad, I know what I'm doing. And it's really funny because I think when we're in the MGA, he tells me how to drive, and it's kind of like, I have been doing this for a while, and it's really funny because it's like, you know, coming up to the speed hump, it's like, I can do this in the Astra, I can do it in the car, I know that if you go too fast it's going to be horrendous, I know the car sits lower, you know, it's all a different approach, isn't it?
But you say you've been driving for a while, but you've only been driving Frisky for like 5 years now. So you got Frisky 5 years ago and inherited it from your granddad.
Yeah, that's right. And I've got his flat cat with us, so I should probably put that on, as he is the reason that I am in this car with you today, because he had the MGA for 30 years, so he passed away 5 years ago this summer, and I took over custodianship, not ownership, because, you know, they're hopefully going to be here a lot longer than we are.
They've done well so far.
Absolutely, but it was a real kind of transition from passenger seat to driving seat, because I'd never driven anything like that before. And I think when you're younger and you're growing up, you don't have a driving license because you're not old enough. So you're just absorbing the experience, and I wouldn't say passive in it, because being in an older car is such an engaging way to get around because of the smells, the sounds, like we've just been talking about, even honking the horn. It's so different to being in a modern car, but then going from sitting next to him to sitting there without him in charge of that car, terrifying. Absolutely terrifying.
I remember reading your article about like that very first drive and how eventful it was and how nerve-wracking it was and how it took some getting used to.
Yeah, absolutely, because I didn't pay attention to what he was doing when he was driving that car until he was 92 years old.
Oh my goodness, wow.
And I used to go out as a young girl in it, you know, like knee-high to a grasshopper type thing. But then, you know, as an adult, towards the end of his life, we'd go out and there was a road near his house, straight road, a couple of undulations, and then a bend right at the end of it. And I just remember getting in the car, and because he was quite small and frail towards the end, and he got to this stretch of road and he just opened it up, and he'd verge into the middle of the road, and as you know, there was sort of semi-bends in some points of it, and I'd sit there absolutely terrified, be like, what are you doing? But it was the most efficient way to get from one end of this road to the other, and he'd slow down towards the bend, but he just turned into a completely different person when he was behind the wheel of this car, so when I took over custodianship, that first drive for me was terrifying in different ways, because I didn't even know how to get the handbrake to loosen, so I kept tugging it up, trying to press the button to get it to release. It wouldn't work. I got the neighbour involved, he couldn't work it out, but now I know there's a slight nuance to it, like with everything with these cars.
Absolutely.
And you know, managed to get the gear stick off and set off, and ignorance was bliss before I left, because I went out, I had sparkly sandals on, had little short shorts, had my sunglasses, it's going to be amazing, and you couldn't make it up. It was a biblical sort of hail, like it was just horrendous within 20 minutes of leaving the house, and I'd got onto a dual carriageway going along, heavens opened, pulled into the services and found the corner of this service station car park. Inside the car is completely soaked, there's puddles of water in the ridges of the passenger seat, I'm soaked head to toe, and it's one of those things where there was these two chaps and they were on their way to a classic car show, and they came over and they said, are you alright? And I was like, not really. And they helped me put the roof on.
Yeah.
And the roof hadn't been up for years because my granddad didn't take it out if it was a sort of a roof on day.
Quite a stretch if they've not been on for a while.
Oh yeah. And the like, it was quite rusty and really stiff, but the three of us managed to get the roof on. And then the next question they asked was, have you got the windows?
Oh,
Windows? What?
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
Because you've never seen it with windows or
No.
and the roof up and everything.
No. And so I was like, and I sort of managed to sort of edge around the question, the answer. And they said, oh, would you like a cup of tea? And I was like, oh no, don't worry. And so they said our goodbyes, and
Yeah.
I sort of limped home in a very, very soggy old car. But the heavens were still in full,
Yeah.
dump it on your head mode. And I got to a roundabout, I couldn't see anything, I didn't know how to turn the window wipers on, and then I couldn't get it into a lower gear, and then I got it stuck, and no hazard lights on the car, and it was so stressful, and I was terrified. And when you get to that point of you want to cry, but that's not going to help you get out of this situation, and you're stuck on a roundabout and you're not going anywhere. So I managed to sort of get myself out of the situation, pulled into a bus stop, and I just sat there and I just said to the car, I was like, please, can we just get back? I'm sorry. And it was her way of saying, you have to show me some respect.
Yeah.
You can't just get in me, go off on a jolly and think that that's all okay. I hadn't done any due diligence before that, but I didn't know. So, I learned a lesson.
Getting into an Astra and just going and that was so similar to like the first trip that we did. I'd had Peggy not even like a month, and I'd done some kind of driving around here kind of stuff, but I hadn't gone any further than like an hour away, and we'd gone, go to Wales kind of thing in her this holiday that we booked even before we got her. And like, I love that trip and I talk about it so much, and these guys on the podcast have heard too much about it, but it was such a turning point of me realising, okay, there's so much I need to learn, but when it's good, you're like, but it's worth learning. Like, everything is worth learning so that you can have the good moments of how well this can be.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. It's like there have been so many moments like that, and again, I've had two cars other than this, other than the MJ, and they've both been Ford Fiestas, and I've been able to get in them and go, and I've never been frightened of them. And Frisky, that's the name of the car because of the number plate, which is FSK 302. And so Dodo, which is what my granddad's nickname was, called her Frisky, and it suits her because she is an impeccably sexy red roadster, so very kind of typical sports car. And it was a retirement present to himself, and so a bit of a cliche, but she is a stunner, so the name suits. And she has been just such a massive lesson in what a car can mean and how a car can make you feel, because she's terrified me, she's made me feel elation, she's made me feel like empowered, proud, so many emotions because of something that is fundamentally just it's just a machine.
So because of like all the things that you've learned, you've come so far in kind of your confidence in using her and going on some really exciting trips and adventures. Quite recently, to the time of recording this, you did a 600-mile trip round for some pasties.
We did, so I'm very lucky that my dear old dad, if you're going to watch this, Dad, hello! I'm in a Morris Minor, it's really cool. So he's a mechanic by trade, and I'm going to say by passion as well, because growing up we went to car shows, we went to air shows, very much in that scene. And I have to say, he has a huge amount to do with why I've been able to take on the responsibility of keeping the car. Because I am someone that had no previous knowledge of mechanics in such an in-depth way, and so he's been it's mechanic and apprentice. Every time something's gone wrong, he's shown me what the problem is, he's taught me how to fix it, we've done that together,
absolutely.
we've argued about the whole thing, and we've got a lot closer because of it, and we've gone on some brilliant adventures. And the one you just mentioned, we went to Cornwall last summer, and we were in a place called Tintagel, and we just had a full English breakfast. We got to this corner and there was a really nice pasty shop on the corner, and we're looking through the window, see the ladies making these pasties. We were both too full up, and so we didn't buy one, and the whole 300 and something mile journey home, Dad regretted it. We went to another pasty shop, we put it in the engine bay to keep it warm, like we secured it with some cable ties, I think, in the engine bay, got it out, and it was just not, it just didn't do it. So I said to Dad when we got home last September, we're going to have to go back to Tintagel to get a pasty from Pengenna Pasties. And so last Sunday we did exactly that, and so it was a 600-mile round trip in one day for a Cornish pasty. Utterly absurd, ridiculously expensive, but I think anyone that owns a classic car who enjoys it, and why wouldn't you, you just do these stupid things sometimes, because it's all part of ownership, and we don't know what the future holds, and so it was a lot of petrol money, but
as much as possible and go as far and like get as much experience with them as you can.
Absolutely.
As long as you can.
Yeah, and I think, you know, as I say, I'm very lucky that I've got my dad to share that experience with, because I do fully understand why people are put off owning a classic car because of the maintenance side of it, and you know, when things go wrong it can be really scary, but there's always someone to help, and generally speaking, you know,
it's amazing, like, because of like the way that the car looks and stuff like that, the amount of people that will literally appear out of bushes when something goes wrong, and lend you a hand and say, look, here, what can we do to help, kind of thing. So even when you're on your own, it's not like the worst scenario ever, and you learn from them.
Absolutely. Didn't that happen to you recently, or last?
Yes, that was like last September when we went up to Motorist, and somebody literally appeared and produced a pair of pliers, and because I didn't have some, but now I have some in the car, and I have a spare accelerator spring, so don't worry about that today. So I've learned from that you can, and it's just like, if you don't get out and you don't use them, and you don't take them on all these trips and don't make all those memories with them, you don't get the same connection to them, and you never kind of learn how much you can do with it.
Absolutely. And I think as well, I mean, my dad and I, you know, talking about doing long distance challenges, sometimes, some days, getting the car, you know, even lockdown's a great example, when you couldn't go anywhere that wasn't an essential journey. Even taking the MGA to Tesco's to do some shopping felt like an absolute triumph, you know, and it was a 7.5 minute journey in the car, and that was amazing, because also you weren't using the cars very much, and so you're thinking, is it going to start? And when it did start, and when it just went, and it was great. And so those micro journeys can feel like the biggest triumph ever, but I'd encourage people to do longer distances, because it's better for the car. You've got to run that system through, and also it's on those distances where if you are traveling with someone, you have the most amazing conversations. You know, you're seeing the world through your windscreen that's different to everybody else's.
And my favourite photos to take are literally from the driver's seat, looking at like whatever it is that you can see, with like the dashboard and the view of the bonnet and things out the window, in terms of, look, this is the view that I get whilst I'm driving round. Because you don't get that feeling, I don't feel, with driving around in your modern cars. Like you say, even that trip to Tesco's is an adventure, because it might not start, or you might have an issue, but equally you know that they can do it because they were doing it for years and years and years before any other option was available. Yeah,
of course. And I think one of the things that can be off-putting is, you know, and I do get this when things go wrong with the car, is our roads are very different in terms of how many vehicles are on them now, and how fast other vehicles go, and it does feel it can and is very intimidating when you're in a tiny car on a motorway, and you've got lorries and you've got SUVs, you've got people carriers, you've got all these vehicles that are bigger, faster, and basically squash you rather easily and probably not even notice. Like, I do understand that, but at the same time, I think classic car owners generally drive more carefully, because you do realise that there's not a lot between you and disaster, and you're more in tune with your car. And so, you mentioned earlier that the sounds of your engine, it has its own unique noises, and when you hear something going wrong, you hear it, you smell it, you see it on the gauges. And so if something is going wrong, you'll get yourself off the road and out of the way. So
absolutely. And I'm so glad to hear that I'm not the only person that drives with my nose, in terms of, you drive past something and you're like, is that us, or is that them out there that are making that smell? Because that's not a good smell for us. Dad and I, with the trip we did to Cornwall last weekend, which I'm happy to report was very successful. We had no hiccups with the car, which was quite, it's a rare thing, because there's always something, even if it's just a headlight that's decided it's had its time. There's always something on any trip that goes wrong, and it's often something you can patch up and work out later on. But when we were driving along in the morning, so we took it in turns. So I did the there journey, and Dad did the back journey, driving along, and we had just refueled. So you're bound to have a bit of a petrol station fragrance in the car. But it was beyond fragrance. It was a proper up the nostril. I'm getting there's something going on here. And we have had problems in the past where fuel's been leaking out of, like, the carburetor overflow chamber, things like that. So pulled over, popped the hood, had a look, and you kind of, and I've started to, it sounds ridiculous, but you not only get a feel for the car in terms of how it drives, but feeling in the engine bay. You go in with dry hands and you go underneath something, and if it comes out wet, there's a problem. Not good.
And so I had a good little fiddle around and rubbed my hand up against various parts and pieces of metal, and nothing was too damp, and the bits of oil, which is fairly natural, they do spring leaks, but there was nothing untoward in there. And so we carried on. But it was, I don't know what caused it, I don't know where that whiff came from, but it's a very just all your senses are just going all the time. The hearing, what you're looking at, the gauges, even just the feel of the car, if it's pulling, if it's doing this, if it's doing that. It's just, it's just totally absorbing.
You did a roadside adjustment of the time. When you realised that she wasn't going up the hill as well as a Monte Carlo winner should do.
Yes. With the Monte Carlo reference, so my granddad bought the car 35 years ago, it would be now, and at that point it had just been used in the Monte Carlo Classic Challenge and came first. So the car in its complete form won the Monte Carlo Rally, and then the next year the guy that sold it to him called him up and said, my MGA engine has blown up, can we borrow yours? And so the engine has done the Monte Carlo Classic twice. The car itself in its full form has done it once and come first place. And so it was built to kind of race specification, and you'd expect it to be able to accomplish a hill with ease. And Dad and I were down in the West Country, and we were doing Porlock Hill. And she got up there fine, but as I think, what was his phrase? It wouldn't pull the skin off of custard. And so we got to the hotel that night and sort of had a discussion about what to do, because sometimes making those adjustments when you're on a trip and you're quite away from home, when the car's running okay, but just not at its peak performance,
you're like, whether it's worth making that and risking it getting worse.
Exactly. But we decided to go for it. But I don't know, this is, maybe it's the same with all classic cars, but sometimes the people that have designed the engines and where things are, you just want to shake them and say why, because to adjust the timing, one of you has to be underneath the car on an MGA so you can see the teeth, and the other person has to be on the top turning the engine so that it lines up in the right place. And so that was a roadside tweak that Dad did all the muscle work, because he was the one turning the engine over, and I was the little person that got underneath the car to shout when it had got to the right position, like for top dead centre and that. And it worked. But I think these cars kind of, they ease into these adjustments and then they wriggle a bit in another direction. So I think this summer we'll probably have to do something else to make her run a bit smoother, because, you know, as these engines, you know, they get the oil through them and they get tired and they get a bit more needy, and so, you know.
And you've got a big endurance run coming up this summer as well, so you're going to want them in kind of the best condition that you can to pull that off.
Yeah, so Dad and I were looking for a challenge, and we want to raise some money for charity as well. So we're going to be doing this rally that we've invented ourselves for the blood bikes, and we've called it the 4 Points Challenge. And it's actually inspired by my stepbrother, who has done 3 of the 4 points, but not all at once. And the idea is that the UK, the 4 furthest points in the UK, so you've got 1 in Norfolk, 2 in Scotland, and Land's End down in Cornwall.
Yeah.
We've worked out the route is approximately 2,000 miles. And so to make it a challenge, we are hoping to accomplish that journey, those 4 points of the UK, in 48 hours, which means no sleep, no stopping other than going for a rest break, perhaps moving around, because, you know, you do get quite scrunched up in these cars, and my dad's over 6 foot tall, so I think we'll end up being like this by the end of the 2 days. But yeah, so part of doing the trip to Cornwall as well was just to see how the car coped with doing 600 miles in a day, how we coped being awake sort of slightly longer, and we both took the 3 hours, like, you know, it was sort of 5 hours ish each way, so we both drove that as a chunk each, so again, to get used to just being behind the wheel for a bit longer. And we've done some longer journeys, we've been up to the Highlands and things like that, so we're not afraid of doing the distances, but this will be different in terms of the intensity of which it all has to be done, you know, and working things out. So one of the things we came to the conclusion of during this trip to Cornwall was that we want to have a toothbrush in the car, face wipes in the car, and like other sort of bits and pieces, because, you know, when you brush your teeth, it wakes you up a little bit. And
that's why there's those chewable toothbrushes.
Yeah,
in, like,
when you see service stations.
Stuff.
So just things like that might help to keep us awake, because, I mean, because we're raising money for charity, it has to be difficult. You know, it's got to be done safely, of course. So we'll be sleeping and trying to take a nap whilst each other is driving. And
have you tried sleeping in for a ski yet?
My dad's fallen asleep several times, so he's all right. But I'm not sure. I think with stuff like this, there's going to be, I imagine, quite a lot of adrenaline, because we've got a time frame, we've got destinations we need to get to, and so it adds that dynamic where I don't know if I'd be able to sleep. But at the same time, you've got to, because, you know, we obviously can't fall asleep at the wheel. And so it's going to be really interesting in terms of, you know, keeping it safe, but also having that target in mind, is that, you know, people are going to be sponsoring us to do this to raise some funds for a really good cause. And we're going out there with the intention of doing it, not kind of like, oh well, we'll see how it goes. You know, we're serious about this.
Absolutely.
And yeah, so it's going to be pretty interesting, I think.
It sounds so exciting, and I'm really excited to kind of see how it goes,
how it pans out. Yeah.
Have you got, like, how original is Frisky in terms of, I know that when I do long trips in Peggy, the secret radio hidden in the glove box and the speakers play a good role in terms of a road trip playlist.
Yes.
And it's all going. So has Frisky got anything like that, or is it headphones for you each and hoping for the best?
So we actually had a big trip planned, which was going to happen during the pandemic. So obviously it didn't happen, and for that we had done a lot of work to the car to kind of uprate it to what I would call an adventure spec. So we've got 5 different charging ports, USB charging ports, they're like cigarette holders where you can charge USBs and things like that. So we can charge our phones, we can have camera set up. We've got a GoPro that we've never really used and got on with. I don't know if anyone else has issues with GoPro batteries, they just don't last. But I've got, my best friend bought me a portable speaker, so I can connect that up, and so we've got a few sort of modern sort of flourishes that so we can have some music and we can keep stuff charged and things like that. And I mean, as ridiculous as it is, one of the things that I find difficult, and that particularly so when we did Cornwall the other week, is we left at around 5 in the morning and it was so cold, and where I've taken the carpets out of the car just to keep, you know, the kind of original stuff fairly protected. I've just got like mats in there, but obviously metal chassis, wooden floor, it's a very cold environment, especially when it's frosty morning. And so what we do is we actually take the pipe that connects to the heater. I say that heater, it's not very efficient. And so we basically have heat coming from the engine bay into the cockpit for heat. So you absolutely stink afterwards, but it makes it a little bit more comfortable in the mornings and late at night, because it is very, very cold. And I'm not sure whether that actually keeps you awake or makes you fall asleep sometimes. It's like when you're verging on hypothermia, you start to shut down a little bit. So yeah, but what's Peggy like? Is she quite good? Has she got a functional heater?
Yeah, the heater is functional, and it's almost too good sometimes in the summer. Not because I have to leave it on, but because it's just peace of mind to leave it on in terms of cooling.
Yeah.
In the summer, it just helps keep her kind of reasonably cool and not as likely to overheat when we do longer trips in the summer.
Yeah.
But it makes us then warm, so it's like windows down and stuff like that. And I remember we drove to the south coast last year on the hottest day of the year, and it was a real experience, but it was so many little things that made like little creature comforts in the hot. So the towels on the seats are decorative, but also help with the fact that the vinyl seats make your back sweaty.
Yeah.
And then I'd noticed, even in my little short drive, because the heater blows down directly onto the handbrake, and the handbrake is metal, the handbrake can get hot. So I was like trying to find something that I could use to kind of cover it.
Okay.
And it turned out that the Riley Elf came with a luxury rubber handle. It was a smidgen too small for a Morris Minor, but if you work really hard and you like use a lot of brute force, you can squeeze it onto the handbrake, and it means that you're touching rubber that's not going to burn your hands when it's really hot. And it was just like little things like that made such a difference. But yeah, the heat, especially if you're doing it in June, aren't you? So it's gonna, hopefully the weather will be dry, because it'd be easier to do the driving, but also it's then staying away from the heat, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the thing is, in that car, if it's a sunny day, I mean, it's the perfect time to drive a sports car with
roof
soft
down,
top, you know,
everything.
absolutely. But I tell you what, you cook. And like Dad and I went away to Cornwall, like Devon, we take it day by day, see, and I think that's a real part of the difference between the challenge and the trips we normally do. So we'll cover 2,000 miles or so in a 7 or 8 day trip, but you're kind of taking it, we literally take it day by day. I book accommodation based on where we're going to get to, where we hope to get to, so that if the car breaks down and it has to get trailered because it can't be fixed, then we just go home or get a hire car, and it just takes that stress. And I think that's a really, perhaps a good tip for anyone that's thinking about getting a classic car, is that, you know, don't put too much pressure on the destination. You know,
but
obviously,
enjoy the journey.
Yeah,
it's not always about getting to the place.
Yeah,
it's getting to the place, but in your car.
Yes,
it's great to go to kind of meets and things like that, but at least half the fun, if not more, for me, is getting there in the car and having her there. And that's like why I really enjoy having the picnic blanket where I sew on patches in places that we made it to. It's like almost little mini trophies of we made it to here, regardless of it, and wasn't a problem if we didn't, but it was great that we did, kind of thing.
Absolutely, and that's it. We call it, it's like a take it day by day trip. And it, you know, and the thing is as well, some days if you give yourself a week to go on a trip somewhere, you might want to hang out somewhere for a few hours if you find a cool museum, somewhere scenic that you can go for a mooch in, a nice town, or just some wicked driving roads. It just takes that pressure off, because I think life is so fast paced now. You know, everything's now, everything's, you know, I wanted it yesterday, I can order it online, it can be on my doorstep in the morning. And these cars, they don't do that. If they don't want to work, they don't work, and you have to make them work sometimes. And that's it. And it's like, it just teaches you to slow down. And for me, I'm quite a highly strung person. I worked in national newspapers for about 15 years.
Yeah.
Very high pressure environment, lots of, you know, now. And so coming out of that world, going into freelance and writing about classic cars and people like yourself who are doing really cool things with their classics, you know, outside the box. This is a podcast studio, it's a YouTube recording studio. That's wicked.
And it gets me to and from work.
Yeah.
Which, like, again, like, I'm not saying, like, teaching isn't the hardest job in the world, but it's like, it comes with stresses. And having a car that getting home in is a bit more relaxing, a bit more switched off. And again, it's something that I've spoken about before. It's a very kind of mindful activity for me in terms of getting that daily driving of a car that I really enjoy driving.
And it keeps you on your toes. It's unexpected, and you've got to pay attention. And with that mindfulness is that, you know, with Frisky, she has. I got asked the question recently: why should we save classic cars? And I found it really difficult to answer, because there's so many reasons why, in terms of, you know, you could talk about fuel efficiency, you should talk about the limited amount of mileage and the damage on the environment that we don't do because we don't use them as often. There are so many kind of practical arguments and reasons, and the heritage. But for me, all I could think in the back of my head was like, how many people have classic cars saved, in terms of, you know, they were going through a tough time in their life. Working on the car gave them the headspace to work through what was going on in their life emotionally, and things like that. And it's, I know it's a bit of a weird tangent to come from the question of like, why should we save classic cars, because there's always the battle cry stuff. But I'm like, you know, think how many people that all these old cars have, the owners, the custodians, the drivers, the passengers, how many people these cars' lives have impacted. And you know, and the process of restoring them, you restore yourself. And it's just, I find that really interesting, is that like they've also saved us. And Frisky, I got made redundant at the end of 2019 from a job that I'd done for a decade. It was all part of a big merger of two newspapers, so there were lots of people going through the same thing, but I found it a very isolating experience. And then the pandemic hit, I had no work, but what I did have was this amazing car that I'd inherited, and I really recognised the fact that I am extremely privileged to have that car. And it's, you know, not a lot of people have that opportunity, but that car has given me a purpose, it's given me friendships, it's given me adventures, it's given me like tears, and you know, it's given me so much. And it saved me because it gave me that purpose, you know, and that's got nothing to do with saving it because it's a heritage vehicle and it's important and it's just, it saved me because it gave me something to focus my energy on, you know.
And I imagine there are so many cars that have done that through the pandemic for people.
Did you got Peggy during the pandemic as well,
Yeah,
didn't
I
you?
mean, it was for different reasons, in that obviously I needed the car for getting about and things with moving in and out. But one of the first things that was like you could come back to and start getting a little bit of normality was like outdoor socially distanced events.
Yeah.
So that was the first kind of things coming out of the pandemic that you could do, and car shows can fit into that.
Mm-hmm.
So having my own car to take to events, having been to like events literally since I was born, it was such a new experience for me. And again, has given me, yes, I've got the kind of family friends and things like that have been involved with the cars for as long as ever, like, but I've also got so many new friendships, met so many new people, with the kind of mobility that this has given me.
Yeah.
And it's not that a modern car couldn't give you the ability to drive to the NEC or to drive to an event or whatever, but you wouldn't necessarily have the reason to go to that event.
Yeah.
So then it's a case of, well, I'm really thankful that I went for a classic as my daily, and I think using it as a daily is what's made me somewhat, I think my mum would put it as fearless in terms of it. Some of the stuff I'll say I've done, my mum's like, I don't want to hear, I don't want to hear. She's like, how long do you reckon it's going to take you to get to Bicester? That means you'd be going at like these speeds. And I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm going to get there eventually. She's got a 5-speed gearbox, but like at the same time, it's a case of, if I didn't, I wouldn't get anywhere, because for a while it was me and Jamie's only car. So if I didn't like just go, right, well, I'm going to use it like every other car and hope for the best. If I break down, well, I've got RAC coverage and something will happen. I might be sat at the edge of the road for a few hours, but it's nothing that if I've got a flask of tea in the back and some biscuits, you can't just wait out.
Yeah.
Like,
car snacks are absolutely essential, and we when Dad and I go away, we have a Tupperware box that's, I don't know if it's about this big, and it sits in the passenger footwell, but the problem with that is that it gets quite hot,
and so really selective about the type of snacks you take and the time of year and all this sort of stuff.
Chocolate biscuits, I mean, we still ate them, of course, but that was quite a mess, because there was a nice packet, I think they were chocolate digestives, and they just turned into a mush of, which was delicious. But you know, we've learned also not to put things like bananas, because they're not good when they're hot. You know, but it's you know, we do all sorts of things. Like I say, we got this Cornish pasty, and it's really the random things you can do with a classic car that's fun. You know, if I said to you, I went to Cornwall and I put a Cornish pasty in the engine bay of my Astra to see if it would keep it warm and whether it would absorb that kind of engine heat and smell and taste, and you'd be like, why? And some people may ask why you do that in a classic car as well, but it was just because we thought, why not? You know.
Yeah, and you've always got something like to speak about. Like, I know going into the office on a Monday or whatever, it's a case of people have seen what I put up on Facebook or whatever, and they're like, oh, I can't believe you went there or whatever, or you did this, or like, and my students are the same. They'll be like, oh, so what did you do this weekend, or like, where have you taken the car, kind of thing. And I think it gives you so much to talk about with people.
Absolutely.
I'd like to I might admit that sometimes I probably bore people talking about
me too,
car and stuff, but equally
I think we sat for 4.5 hours today talking.
But like, you end up talking about loads of other stuff as well as tangents and going off on things, and I imagine this is probably going to be one of the longer of the podcasts as well, because it's just once you get to know someone and you've got that common ground of cars and going on adventures in the cars and stuff, there is so much to talk about.
Absolutely.
Do you think you'd ever get another classic?
Oh yes. I can't say I'm addicted yet because I haven't got another one, but if I had the space to have another car that was a classic, I would absolutely dive right in. I'm not sure what I'd get, because I'd love like an old Land Rover, Defender.
Like
I mean, that would be amazing. I mean, I think the thing is that they're all so exotic because they're so different to what we drive now in terms of what's coming out now and sort of second-hand car market. They're so different, they're so exciting,
and there's so much like choice as well. I mean, even cars that have supposedly got the same engine. So I obviously drive Peggy every day, but my parents have got an Austin A40, and it's got an A series engine in it, so supposedly the same engine, but it's got slightly different steering, different gearbox to Peggy and things like that. And it's little things like that even though it's the same engine, it's the same kind of company essentially that was building them all, you're still experiencing something different.
It's a totally different car, isn't it?
Yeah. And I can see why so many people are doing YouTube channels trying all these things out, because my dad's just bought another car. Well, my mum's bought another car for my dad for his birthday, and I was just thinking, I cannot wait to have a go at driving that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he's not even got it at the moment, at the time of recording, technically, because he's not allowed it until his birthday. But yeah, you just think, I cannot wait to have a go at driving that. Or,
Yeah.
I wonder what that would be like to drive, and getting those sorts of opportunities.
It is amazing. I love an American car.
Yeah.
The biggest issue, so I met a chap last year at a local car show in the Midlands, and he's got a Mercury Marquis, or Marquis, however you say it.
Yeah.
And he took me for a drive in that, and it is just an absolute beast. And
The engine rumble on that will have been something.
Yeah, a real guttural growl. Like Peggy's growl is like this flirtatious, but his was like really from the gut, and it was just bouncy, and you've got the bench seats, and it's just a totally different experience, because it has this presence that most British cars don't have, just because of the sheer scale of it. And it's
also
just
the
absurd.
size of the roads and stuff that we were on versus them.
Yeah.
Like, they could warrant a car of that size, but there wasn't really a need for that over here post-war and everything.
Absolutely. I mean, I spoke to a young lady called Aubrey who lives in Wyoming in the States, and she's got a Thunderbird, and it's, what is it? It's a rose, dusty rose, or dust rose, the colour, and it's just this beautiful car. And she does pin-up pageants, and we were chatting about the roads over there, and she was saying how, obviously they're so massive, and she said that roundabouts are like the most foreign concept to Americans, because they just don't have them. And she was just saying about the driving experience of her car, and I look at that, and obviously I love my car. Like, Frisky is just the I see there are love hearts in my eyes when I look at her. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't fall in love with other cars, because there's part of me that feels like it would be a betrayal if I got another car. But when I saw Aubrey's Thunderbird, convertible, dust pink, I'm like, that is cool, I want one of those as well. I think I'd find it really hard to choose, and then I think, well, maybe I'd have one for a couple of months and then get another one, but then I don't think I'd want to get rid of it.
Yeah,
and
that's the problem.
That's
you get
how it
attached
starts.
to it in the same way, and then you're like, oh, right, okay, this is how it happened.
Yeah. So how many cars do you reckon on average that your parents have had over the years, like classics?
My dad's got little toy models of all of them.
Okay.
Because they were daily in classics and stuff in the 90s, and then they were buying cars at Christmas and stuff like that were just big cars for Christmas trips and stuff. So many. I don't. It's got to be upwards of 30, I would imagine. And it's you just can't imagine that number of cars in a lifetime, especially when I'm like, I don't think I could ever sell Peggy, and you're like,
she's a keeper,
but I want all of these other cars, and you're like, I can see now how you end up like rifling through so many of them.
And they're a good example of people that have actually, put some proper mileage on their cars, because they used to rally, didn't they?
Yeah, they used to do like historic rallies and stuff around the country and stuff. And again, I think, as much as it probably stresses them out a little bit when I'm like, okay, I'm off for X hundred miles to go and buy a curry up in Yorkshire, and then I'll be back, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, but like, let us know when you're back. It's probably in the blood that you just want to go out and have an adventure, and it's obviously a little bit in yours when it's your granddad's car and you're going out with your dad and your mum on other occasions to have adventures in it.
Absolutely. And I think it is so different, and I'm not someone that likes to stand out in a kind of like look at me way, but I like to be different in just the way that it's quirky and it's a conversation piece. And I keep journals with that car. So when my grandfather passed away and I got the car, I treated myself to a lovely moleskin journal, and it's red, so it matches the car. I always have red nails as well, most of the time red nails. And in these journals, I write letters. So, dear Dodo, this is where I've been today, this is how it felt. And it's not always stuff with the car, it's stuff associated with the car. So I'll write a journal entry about today, because this experience that we're having now and this time that we're sharing, that is all a result of this decision that he made 35 years ago to buy Frisky.
Yeah.
And so I want to tell him about that. You know, I want to tell him that, you know, I've had this amazing day out with you, and I've been in a Morris Minor today, and I've smelt it, I've felt it, I've bounced around in it, I've recording a podcast. No, but it's amazing. And the fact that, you know, if you'd have told him 35 years ago that you could make a podcast and a YouTube video in a Morris Minor, he'd be like, what's YouTube? What's a podcast? And
why are you doing it in a Morris Minor?
Yeah, you know, it would just be this completely alien concept. And how amazing is that? Is that, you know, you're giving your car a really cool chapter, and you're using your car in a contemporary way.
Yeah.
But you're still embracing the old technology, and that's wicked, because you're combining two worlds, and you also do your cosplay stuff, and like, it's just super cool that, yeah, these cars are old, and people think, oh well, you know, here's me sitting in a flapjack. I've got flapjacks on my mind, a flat cap. I do like flapjacks. You know, I'm sitting here in a flat cap, kind of fitting into the old boy cliche. But it's just, use your car how you want to, you know. And when you get people criticising it because, you know, there's a lot more chips in the paintwork of Frisky now, she has deteriorated in her condition. You know, I like to call the damage adventure freckles. Anyone else out there, you can use that, it's a good one. But it shows you love it, it shows you're using it, and it shows that, you know, it's giving that car a chapter and something else for its next owner to be inspired by.
And also, the other thing is that the more that people see them out and about, I like to, we drive past the school now. I drive past the school on my way to work sometimes, and I see all the kids at the same sort of time, obviously going on their walk to school.
Yeah.
And it's a case of, they might not have seen a car before, but that might be, for one of them, a memory of, oh yeah, I remember seeing that car every so often on the drive to school.
Yeah.
And that's a memory for them, that then they take an interest in cars at some point in the future.
Yeah. And how incredible is that? You know, you don't know the impact you're having on those kids and their imagination. And I think now, you know, we're not, young people aren't kind of encouraged to aspire to own cars and that kind of thing, and there's different ways you can engage in it. You know, you show a child a car, and you could be someone that photographs the car, you could write about the car, you could be the person that reupholsters the car, you could be the person that does the mechanics, you could do the spray, like the spray painting, there's so many ways, offshoots of creativity, adventuring, anything that you can do with this object, you know. And the fact that there'll be someone in 20 years time maybe, and they'll be like, they've been inspired by you, that lady that drives past in that really cool Morris Minor, you know, every morning for 2 years of their life, and that triggers something that leads them into something else when they're older.
And we can only hope that some of them will keep the things going.
I think so.
And even the future classics of some of the moderns today and things.
Yeah, and that's it. I think that's a really important point. Like, you know, the future classics, you know, the kind of cult cars, 80s, 90s, noughties, they have just as much right to be in the community as people that own a 60 should be 62 this year, 62-year-old car, or a 30-year-old car. Like, fundamentally, there you go. We're all here for the same reason, is that we like our cars, so it doesn't matter what it is. And I think that's something that's really shifting within the community and the next generation, is that, you know, we can go out and it's a Vauxhall from the 80s or a Golf or whatever, we can be at the same car show, we can park our cars next to each other. I think, you know, it's great to have the mark car clubs, the mark car shows, the mark car meets, but also, you know, like, we can mix it up, we can park different cars next to each other, because the conversation's going to be different. It's not going to be nosing over the fact that your car's got that and my car's got that. It's like, it's a completely different car.
But it will be different discussions about the comparisons. And I imagine that when we park up in just a little bit, we'll let you have a nosy under the bonnet, and you can kind of spot some of the differences between what you're used to poking about with and stuff like that. Yeah, no, it's been really great to talk to you, and such a good kind of hopefully interesting podcast for people to hear, and hopefully get inspired this summer to do something perhaps a little bit different with their classics and things
Absolutely.
than they've done previously. And I'll make sure to kind of link everything down in the comment sections and stuff so that they can follow you on your exciting adventures this summer.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for having me and let me have a little bounce around on the back seat. And just to throw out a question to everyone else, is like, maybe in the comments, like, tell us what is the weirdest journey you've been on in your classic car, because I'd love to know, because I'm always looking for inspiration for ridiculous adventures, and maybe at some point we could all go on one together, because that's what it's all about, right?
Brilliant, absolutely. So thanks ever so much for listening, everybody. Drive safely and happy motoring.
Ta-ra!